Hello, everybody. I'm going to wait a little while. I really need to learn what to do to put a notification up that I'm going to do a live stream. But at the same time, sometimes I decide to do a live stream with like in an hour or two. So probably wouldn't give people much of a heads up anyway. But I haven't been on YouTube as far as making videos for a while again. I haven't even made a standalone, pre-recorded video since last year, which is kind of sad. But there were a few things I wanted to discuss, mostly related to kind of where we're at with all of these policies and how people sort of perceive the coronavirus a year later after it first became a problem, or, became a problem to the people that see it as such. It is a problem, but you can look at the reaction from our government and from a lot of people and see that it's kind of a clown world type of reaction that you'd expect, I guess, or should expect. I'm going to wait a little bit for people to probably come in here because, like I say, I don't post notifications. Probably should. Probably should learn how to do that. Migtocrates says, "Hi, it's been a tough one. I'm a introvert, but the past 6 months has got me really depressed." Yeah, it's a hard transition for a lot of people to go from whatever you were doing to not being able to go do those things, changing people's work lives, changing people's private, personal lives. I'm more depressed about people's reaction to all of it, to be honest. These kinds of things can happen. If this were a disease that was killing 10% of the people that it infected across the board, then this kind of thing might, it's like it would be a disaster. But in that kind of case, the economy would just totally collapse anyway, probably. I've noticed that a lot of people, I figured that other content producers, like within the men's community and such, would be doing live streams tonight. It is kind of late, but it's Saturday night. And especially for people on the West Coast, it's not really late there. So I'm surprised some people aren't doing live streams on other channels. Or they probably are. I'm just not subscribed to some of them and don't know about them probably, but the out of the content producers that I'm subscribed to, I didn't notice anybody else was actually doing a stream. I'm going to go ahead and start my little rant here. This is something that I think is fairly important in terms of putting all this kind of into context a year after the virus became a thing, or, left China and started to spread in Europe and everywhere else too. Really, these mask mandates and stay-at-home orders and even the sort of soft core, if you want to call it that, stuff like, social distancing and not going out when you don't have to, supposedly, all of this kind of stuff, this has all been happening for a year. Now, in some places, like in Ohio, the stay-at-home order only lasted through like May. A lot of places like Ohio also had a curfew for a number of months where you weren't supposed to be out after 10 here. And then they made it 11, and then they said we're not going to have the curfew anymore. But it really wasn't a hard curfew anyway. It was, you're not supposed to go out unless you have a specific reason. You're not supposed to I don't even know what the particular provisions were, to be honest, but it's like you're not supposed to basically party. That's really what it was aimed after, I think. But, you know, people don't seem to be questioning this. They get so caught up, I think, in the argument. Well, this is what I think about the coronavirus, and, people needed to do their part and wear a mask, or people shouldn't have to do that because, they should be allowed to do whatever they want to do, or the coronavirus is that bad, or it's not that bad. I think people get caught up in that and they don't realize, wait a second, after a year of having to wear a mask every time you go out in public, after a year of being told that, you should stay at home because that keeps people safe, after a year of all the stuff that, the social distancing, all that stuff, what kind of progress have we made, right? The numbers are just now somewhat starting to go down, but that's because we're getting the shots. That's because people are literally being inoculated, supposedly at least, against the coronavirus. Like, after a year of these policies supposedly working or helping, where are we? Is the situation any better than it was when it first started? Now, maybe in some ways we are better off, like with the resources to deal with people who do actually get sick from the virus. But aside from being a little bit more prepared for the people that do get the virus and do have major symptoms and could potentially pass away, which is a small subset of the population, or maybe I shouldn't say that. It might be 1 out of every 4 people could be susceptible from dying from the virus. I don't know, but it's a minority of people. After a year of all these policies that would supposedly protect everyone, where are we? These mask mandates have been completely ineffective in most places, right? Telling people to stay at home has not changed anything. The only thing that's going to finally bring these numbers down of the incidence of virus, new virus infections, the only thing that's going to bring that down is if people are immune to it, basically. Either they get the shot or they get the virus, or they've had it already, and it's given them enough resistance or immunity to it that stops the spread of it. That's the only thing that's going to really change stuff. And I've said that kind of stuff before, but what I've noticed is, people want to argue about whether this is an infringement on people's rights, which to a large extent it is, to have the stay-at-home orders. In some places in Europe, I think, from what I've heard, you have to check in with the authorities and say, well, I'm going to leave for this specific reason, or at least, probably not in whole countries, but in some areas where the virus is really rampant, I've heard that that's what they're doing. It's like the argument is on whether that should be allowed or not, but how effective are the policies? If the virus is still as bad as they say that it is, that means that the whole rationale is completely irrelevant. Like the rationale becomes just hollow because it doesn't work. Telling people to stay at home and stay away from one another, maybe that brings the numbers slightly down, but it doesn't stop anything. It just continues to spread. So, otherwise, if this weren't the case, the numbers would be way down and this virus would be controlled after a year of these policies. And people, I think, don't stop to think about that. And it's just, these ineffective policies continue. And I think you have to be able to and this is the mental process that I've gone through recently. I'm kind of describing how my thoughts have not really shifted, but have developed over the past few months as I've realized, this has gone on for a whole year, or, we were approaching that point. Why is it that if these policies are effective, that the coronavirus is as bad now, supposedly, as it was a year ago? How is it almost as much of a threat now, aside from the vaccine, aside from people getting, the shot? And you can discuss that back and forth, whether that's a good idea to get vaccinated or not. I don't even really want to talk about that too much. I can, but I think it's up to individual discretion. I think all of this should be up to individual discretion. People should look at this and say, is the coronavirus really a threat to me? If I think that it is, should I get the vaccine? People need to decide that for themselves, I think, by looking at the facts and doing their own analysis. But, when it comes to the policies themselves, aside from the vaccine, they're clearly ineffective. They don't freaking work. And yet, all you hear still after a year is stay at home, wear a mask everywhere. If you don't wear a mask, you're a bad person, basically. It's just ridiculous to think that that makes sense when after a year, these policies have not borne any sort of fruit. Things have not gotten any better at all. Other than, you could argue that hospitals have more resources and stuff like that. People might be more prepared material-wise. But other than that, and the vaccine itself, the situation is not improved. It's like my state, Ohio, there's a sort of color-coded alert status that they give for each county in Ohio. And it goes from 1 to 4, with 4 being the worst. And it doesn't matter because, the policy is the same throughout the whole state. So everybody still has to wear a mask and everything. And you still can't have these parties and whatnot. But at least I think that's the case. I don't think the whole limit on people gathering together, I don't think that's changed. The supposed curfew is over now. And now one other change is that restaurants are allowed to have buffets and stuff like that again, but I don't know how that's going to go. That's just now becoming a thing again. But after a year of all these policies, where are we? We're basically in the same place we were before, except we have some vaccines now that are being distributed, and that are getting basically into the population. Whether that's good or whether that's bad, that's what's happening. But other than that, what progress have we made? And so in these kinds of situations, I think you have to take a step back and look and consider, does this make any sense? Right? Does this whole situation make any sense? This idea that after a year of doing this, we've made no progress in terms of really getting the upper hand on this virus. The whole state of Ohio, I mentioned the alert system. Most of the counties are at least in level 3 alert for coronavirus. It's ridiculous, but if you're going to buy the message that the coronavirus is still such a concern, why should it be if these policies were actually effective in the first place after a year? It makes no sense. So to me, you have to look back, and I've kind of learned to do this, as I've gotten older, as I've gained more experience in looking at stuff. You have to take a step back and say, does any of this really make sense? If these policies were meant to make a positive difference, and I'm talking about the mask mandates, the stay-at-home orders, social distancing, all this stuff, which, some of it's not codified in terms of having to stay away from people, but if all these policies were meant to wipe out the coronavirus, why have we seen no progress? And if they're just failed policies, why aren't our leaders changing course? Well, I think, in these situations when that doesn't make sense, and you have to say, well, at the very least, they would be trying to change the policies behind the scenes, right? They'd have to look at this and say, well, if this is the case, that these policies are clearly not working, we need to basically lift the mask mandate and at least pretend like the situation's better and then try something else, right? You'd think that if their goal was really to curtail the coronavirus, that they would have changed policies by now, because clearly these policies don't freaking work. Now, in these situations, you have to look at, I think, to see the given reason versus the actual reason behind these kinds of policies, behind these kinds of strategies, right? If it doesn't make sense, then the given reason is likely not the same as the actual reason for these policies. So I think a useful strategy is to look at the actual results of these policies that have supposedly been put in place to protect people from the coronavirus, and to instead look at the actual results and then consider what actually makes sense instead, right? Because the given rationale doesn't make sense. This has not done anything to curtail the virus. What actually does make sense based on what these policies have been successful in doing, right? They're not trying to change the policies. So they're doing something successfully. In all likelihood, they're actually having their intended effect, but the intended effect can't be to reduce the incidence of virus, of the virus being spread, because that's not happened. So what are these policies successful at doing? What have they accomplished? Well, for one thing, it makes people feel better. It makes people feel like they're doing something against the virus, even though it's not effective. So at least you psychologically then can get people to where they're not freaking out. You can get people to where they're not out of control and, protesting the government. And you see the same stuff with a lot of the bills that are being passed by Congress and signed by Biden and Trump before him, to be fair, that just basically gives people money and says, here, shut up. We're going to print some money. Take some of this. We don't want you protesting. We don't want you acting out. So here's some money. And then we're going to tell you that staying at home keeps you safe and wearing a mask keeps you safe. So again, you don't freak out. You don't act up against the government. And we can control the situation. That's part of it, I think. Realizing that realizing that really a large part of the population, they don't know how to deal with this kind of stuff. As I've mentioned in some of my other coronavirus videos, it's been 100 years since there's been a supposed pandemic. If you look at the Spanish flu back around 1908, 1909, 1910, before the First World War, it did kill a lot of people. And since that point, we have not had really anything at this level, even if you want to assume that the coronavirus is comparable to that, which it really isn't. But the thing about it is, you end up in a place where I think you've got to realize people today they want the government to take care of them, and that's not an accident. That's not something that has just randomly occurred. We've gotten to that point because a lot of our leaders have engineered society, I think, so that we have people that are more dependent on the state. But in this type of situation, people are going to look for the government or to the government for an answer, right? People are just not going to say, well, this is a risk, but I accept the risk, or, I don't accept the risk, so I'm going to stay at home more often, or I am going to wear a mask because that's my strategy for dealing with the virus so that I don't get it. People aren't going to do that. They're going to freak out and say, well, I thought I was safe. Why isn't the government protecting me? Why can't I find something that I can do to make myself safe again? That's the way a lot of people think anymore, unfortunately. And, rather than just analyzing whatever the risk is and making a rational decision, I don't know that your average people out there can do that anymore. And I'm not trying to act like, I'm so much smarter than everybody else. That's not the case. But a lot of people they want the government to tell them what to do, or they'll freak out. And so I think that's part of it. That's not really the main thing that I want to focus on, though, because I've mentioned that before, and that's sort of an ongoing incentive for the government to continue to lie to people and say that this policy is effective when it's not at curtailing the coronavirus. But the other effects, I think, tell you what the real main goal of these policies were. What did all of this stuff, shutting down businesses, closing down businesses for at least a few months, basically telling people they shouldn't go out unless they have an absolute necessity to take care of, requiring people to wear a mask everywhere they go. What effect did these policies actually have? They created a recession. They made it to where businesses had to shut down, especially small businesses. They made it to where people lost their jobs and had to depend on the government to start sending them money. They basically crunched the middle class. That's sort of the overall point that I want to make. The middle class has been, to a large extent, decimated, if not destroyed, which it probably isn't totally destroyed, but it's been totally crunched to where now more people are dependent on the government. They're dependent on getting checks, bribe money, basically, but they are dependent on the government to take care of them because they've lost their jobs and they've lost their businesses. The elites, the corporations, have gotten the vast majority, the lion's share of the money that has been passed in these laws. So more money is going to the rich, more money is going to government and corporations. The middle class is crunched, the middle class is weaker, and people are more dependent on the state. That is the actual result of these coronavirus policies, right? I mean, that's what it's been successful at doing, not in curtailing the coronavirus, because it's supposedly just as bad now as it was a year ago. So these policies don't work to that end, but they work toward another end. They work toward the end of keeping people, sort of placated, keeping people from freaking out, making them feel like they're doing something to stop this dreaded virus. And they also have basically become dependent on the government, or, they've shut down. Everybody has basically been forced to not patron businesses as much. So they're shutting down businesses as a result of people's choices, or, what they've had to do. In some cases, certain places just had to shut down because the government told them to. But notice, even with the stay-at-home order in Ohio, all these fast food places were still open. A lot of the chain restaurants opened back up fairly quickly. And I'm not saying it was impossible for smaller businesses to do that, but just like a lot of other people said, a lot of people have been saying this besides myself. Why is it that the dollar stores and the mom and pop shops had to close, but Walmart stayed open the whole time? Kroger stayed open the whole time, I think. And to some extent, it's because they're grocery stores and people had to have access to food, but the smaller stores couldn't do that. So what this has really been about is wealth redistribution, crunching the middle class, and making people more dependent on the government, because that's what these policies have been successful in doing. And so you can come up with another hypothesis, I guess, but that's what the evidence shows to me. When you look at a situation like this, and like I say, this is something that I've gotten better at doing, I think, with more practice, it's that type of thing. When you look at what people tell you, and it just doesn't make sense, it doesn't add up, right? Why would this policy still be the way to go in terms of making people wear masks and whatnot when there's no evidence that it helps? All of the evidence that we have says that this doesn't help because the coronavirus is still supposedly such a huge problem, right? After a year of these policies. So this doesn't work for the given reason. So there must be some other reason. Let's look at the actual effects of these policies and determine what that reason likely is. What is the actual underlying force behind this? And it's not, a conspiracy theory. It's just logically looking at what's actually taken place. These policies make no sense in terms of what we're being told is their intended effect. What is their actual effect then? And the actual effect is that the middle class has been crunched. The actual effect is that people lost their jobs, businesses closed, and the corporations endured. How convenient, right? I mean, it's just, to me, it's fairly clear. Like, this has been about hurting the middle class as much as possible and using this virus. I'm not somebody that believes that the whole thing was pre-planned, but they've used this virus just like the government does with a lot of things, whether you're looking at, firearm shootings, mass shootings where people have been killed, whether you're looking at so-called hate speech that's used as a way to curtail free speech, whether you're looking at, things like supposed sexual harassment as a way to take people, particularly men's due process rights away. All of this stuff is just used by our leaders to meet their goal of increasing their power, increasing their stranglehold over society. And to me, that's by far what makes the most sense. It doesn't make sense to think that these policies are intended to deal with the coronavirus, at least not anymore. Instead, these policies are a way of crunching the middle class, making people more dependent on the government, shutting down certain businesses, small businesses, and making people suffer, but also getting people to turn on each other, right? Oh, it's these 5% of people or less that aren't wearing a mask. It's their fault that this society, or that this, I should say, that this policy to wipe out the coronavirus doesn't work. It's because these irresponsible people keep partying and they keep, doing these things that they're not supposed to do because the government tells me that they're not supposed to do this. The law says that they're not supposed to do this. Well, no, because these people would have all had the virus by now if they were really the reason behind it after a year, or the real reason is that, there are not enough of the population to continue by themselves to spread this. It's because the overall policy doesn't fucking work. That's the reason. It doesn't work toward that goal. The real goal is something else. The real goal is what I've stated here. It's to make people suffer, make people more dependent on the state, to crunch the middle class and small businesses so that the corporations have more wealth and more power, and to basically get people to turn on each other so that they don't see what's actually going on. That, this is all about, the wealth and the power of those that already have the most wealth in this society. That's what this is really about, in my opinion. I haven't seen anybody comment on this yet, except for Migtocrates. I can't even talk tonight. I may have chosen a bad night because I seem to be a babbling idiot in terms of getting my words out. Maybe I'm always that way. If anybody else has a comment to leave, I'd be glad to read it or respond to it. I hope my audio is coming through and stuff. I'm kind of concerned about that. Like, I know that I'm not going to get that many views, but if anybody can hear me and comment, that would be appreciated. Because I feel like I might have lost the stream, even though it says that it's still going. Well, Pedrito Navaja, I'm sure that I butchered that pronunciation, says audio is good. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to kind of make sure that the stream was still going. I probably chose a bad time to do this. I thought maybe Saturday night with nobody else doing a stream, that that I knew of that this might be a good time to go live, but maybe not. Might be a little bit too late for people. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's related to what I've already been discussing with the coronavirus, and a year after these policies, we're not really in a much better position except for people literally getting inoculated, literally getting the vaccine. You can argue whether that's good or bad or not, but that's the main difference now compared to a year ago. And hospitals having some more resources. And, I discussed, like I say, that this doesn't make sense. Why should we believe that these mask policies and social distancing and staying at home, why should we believe that that works if the situation's just as bad now as it was a year ago, aside from the things that I've just mentioned? Like, just as many people are getting the virus, basically. So, the numbers are starting to come down, but it doesn't make sense that all of a sudden that's because of the mask mandates and stuff. It's because people are getting inoculated. So, I really think that a lot of it is the real reason is different than the given reason. The given reason is bullshit. The real reason for these policies are what it's been successful at doing. And that is destroying the middle, or I don't want to say destroying, I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but really crunching the middle class, really hurting people with their small businesses, people that, are kind of working class in the sense of, their jobs could be shut down if they don't have customers and whatnot. All of these people have a risk of losing their job. People are in far worse overall financial shape, I'm sure, most people, because of the virus, unless you're somebody that invested in other things besides the conventional financial system, or if you're already a millionaire or billionaire because you have all this stuff from the government coming to you now. A lot of it is just, it's not based on anything to do with combating the virus. It's just, well, this is our opportunity to divide and conquer, to hurt people, to make people more dependent on the government as a result of hurting them financially and economically, and then to, plan our next step to taking people's rights away. And that's what a lot of it, I didn't mention that. I think it's kind of obvious, though. A lot of it is also about setting a precedent, right? Now, anytime there's supposedly a health emergency, we can make you stay home. We can make you go out and take certain actions before you're allowed to leave your home. We can basically say, well, you can't go to church because you're not following the social distancing guidelines, which is totally unconstitutional, right? But it doesn't matter because there's a health crisis or any other sort of crisis that we want to say is comparable, that we can get away with, if you can get away with that as the government. People put up with it. So what is it really about? It's about establishing that precedent for taking people's rights away and all the other stuff I mentioned, crunching the middle class, hurting people so that people are more dependent on the government, and growing the power and scope of government policy. That's what this all is. It's all wealth redistribution and, taking people's basic rights away. It's like a lot of the other stuff that you see today, except on a bigger scale, and it uses a health crisis as sort of the given reason, when the actual reason for these policies are, clearly what the policies have really accomplished. They haven't wiped out the coronavirus, have they? We haven't gotten the upper hand on the virus, supposedly. According to our leaders, we have to continue to do more. So after a year, where have we been successful? Well, we've been successful at hurting regular people. That's what we've been successful at. And so I have to believe that that's the real reason for these policies, based on logically looking at the results of these policies and how it doesn't make sense to think that the given reason is the actual reason for these policies. McTocrates says, yes, you're correct about destroying the middle class and their businesses. I lost what took me years to create now. I have to go through retirement and savings, basically. That sucks, man. I hope that you're able to kind of grab onto another rung of the ladder and kind of be able to find a new source of income or finance or money, because that sucks. A lot of people have been hurt by this, and of course, a lot of people will try to say probably that, well, if the government hadn't taken any action, things would be even worse. I don't see how. In terms of the economy, at least, you might be able to say, well, we would have 10% more people dying from the virus that mostly kills, for the most part, people in nursing homes, people that are already ailing, which is not good. I'm not saying that means they're not worthwhile, to keep around, but for all of society to sort of have the suffering that we have in greater society because of that being the excuse is sad. That people buy that idea, and then the policies don't work anyway. They don't do anything to curtail the virus in the long run anyway. I mean, how have things gotten better? They haven't. So again, the government's just going to keep bribing people. And it's going to keep giving all this money. The majority, the lion's share of the money is going to go to these corporations and the elites, those that already control society for the most part. And it's just going to get worse in terms of, the suffering for regular people. And yet a lot of these people will continue to act like, oh, well, we just need to ride it out. We just need to stay at home for another year and everything will be better. And I really do believe the mask mandate and all that probably will be lifted soon in a lot of places, probably including Ohio. But only because they can't use this as a continued excuse. Eventually people are going to realize, wait a second, if this vaccine is being distributed to everybody, or not literally everyone, but the people that are at the most risk for coronavirus, if this vaccine is being used to inoculate people, why do we need to keep up these policies beyond a certain point? Like, aren't people supposed to be immune or resistant against this now? So eventually I think the government's going to lose its reasoning. Not that it's really... Again, when you look at it for what it is, you can see through the policies anyway. But they're not even going to be able to make your sort of average normie figure out that this has all been about wealth redistribution. It's all been about, taking more of people's rights away, not letting people assume whatever risk they think is appropriate by going out based on what they see, as being fit for them. It's going to be about, most people, it's just like they can't see that these policies have all been about, doing these other kinds of things and not really addressing coronavirus. The government, just used this as a rationale to achieve what it wanted to do. And it's like I say, when you look at some of this stuff, like, these mass shootings, and maybe I shouldn't say that on a YouTube video, but, maybe I should try to use code words, but I'm not going to. Whether it's, oh, this person's racist, we need to take their job, we need to fire them. It's all about setting a totalitarian mindset. It's all about, dividing people, getting people to believe in a certain idea or message that is, pretty much indoctrinated into the masses, like this whole idea of Trump being such a horrible person. I don't really like Trump, but he was not at all what most people seem, or at least a lot of people seem to think that he was. He was the only one trying to actually change things in Washington, or one of the few. And it's just like, a lot of people they've literally voted for the swamp. They voted for the swamp instead in this last election. And there's just no realization of how biased and how, propagandizing the media is now. There's just, most people don't get it. And so they go along with this stuff to a point. But eventually, like I say, I think people will figure out, well, if there's this vaccine or a variety of vaccines that are being offered to people, especially the people that are actually maybe vulnerable to having severe symptoms from this virus, why do we need to keep doing this for these people? Like going out and social distancing and not having any sort of gatherings with a lot of people. Like, why can't we at this point be done with this? And I think a lot of people are going to get sick of it, and you're going to see more of the mask mandates kind of being lifted. But they're going to, the state will try to hold on to some of the restrictions and whatnot. The whole goal is control, wealth redistribution, and gnawing away, chipping away at people's rights. That's the real goal of these policies, because that's the only thing it's accomplished, in my opinion. Metocrates says they lifted the mask mandate here in Texas. Yeah, I have a few relatives in Texas, and they've posted about that. Let me ask you, Metocrates, are there still certain policies for businesses and whatnot that they can't do certain things in Texas? Because Texas is obviously, I know that more leftists are moving into Texas, but it's more of a conservative state, more of a small government, individual-minded state. So, I don't know how much businesses have been hurt there by the government policies, probably just as much as anywhere else, and you said so for yourself. But, I just, in Texas, I don't know whether they still have certain policies, like even in the more conservative states, that limit what people can do, versus like my state, which is kind of a sort of conservative-ish state, but at the same time, kind of dumb. Like, people here don't really know what's going on either, in terms of politics. A lot of people in my own family, even though they're basically traditional conservative people, they voted for Biden anyway. So I don't consider Ohio to really be a conservative state as much as Texas. Bigtocrates says the small business community has been crushed here. Yeah, that's what I figured based on what you said. But are there still any actual, are some businesses literally not allowed to open back up, or is it at least to the point where, hey, we destroyed the middle class now you can have at it again. We accomplished our goal, so go ahead and conduct business even though your business doesn't exist anymore. That's probably what a lot of it is now. Like, they've achieved their goal. But if the more conservative states still have a lot of these restrictions, then it may be a while before we see most of it go away, other than the mask mandate and whatnot. But, again, just overall, it just is, it doesn't make sense to think that we're being told the truth. Like, I consider what sort of the mainstream message is and whether it makes sense, but in this case, it just doesn't. Even for the people that think that this virus is really so terrible and really worth all these policies, it's like you've got to be able to look and see, okay, it doesn't work. Even if you think it's the worst thing ever, these policies have not changed much after a year. What does that tell you about the course of action that we're on? It tells you that we've failed. But we really haven't, because the policies were designed to do something else. That's my take on that. Metocrates says they allowed businesses to open at full capacity. Yes, they achieved their goal at crushing the spirit. Yeah, even in more conservative places, like I say, when the whole thing started with the sort of flatten the curve stuff that we were told about, well, we need to stay at home for a few weeks so that hospitals and stuff are prepared for this. That was not really an unreasonable thing if that's really what it was. But they never changed course. They just decided, okay, we're going to me, this is what my interpretation is. our leaders at various levels of government decided, you know what, we can just use this as an excuse to redistribute wealth. We can use this as an excuse to kind of keep a clamp on people for at least a period of time so that we can do what we want. Now, I'm not saying every leader, of course, is thinking this way. There probably are a few that actually care about good governance, but most of it is just orchestrated by those that have wealth and power already. They're just, in my opinion, the people, the oligarchs, are using this. They're using the ignorance of the masses. They're using this disease as a way to increase their hold over society, because that's really the only thing that this has accomplished. All of these policies have not made the situation better after a year. Therefore, I think it's safe to say they've all failed at what we were told they were supposed to do. So the other thing, or the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think I started to transition into this topic and then kind of got sidetracked again, is how do you think all of this will affect the situation between men and women? The sort of reality of the red pill and walking away from conventional relationships. Everybody has a different interpretation on, what the red pill and MGTOW and stuff like that means to some extent. Like they have their own variant of how they apply that to their life. But, I've been thinking about the sort of game plan that the average woman has. And there is no game plan, really. It's just a matter of, a lot of women, I would go as far to say as most women, their game plan is to ride the carousel of men for as long as they can, and then find a beta to marry and maybe have kids with if they didn't become single moms through the carousel process. And then basically use the financial resources of that man to basically take care of them until they decide that they're not happy and they want a divorce and all that, if they decide that. Or they can continue to basically stay in the relationship to be taken care of, to have financial security, but to just do whatever they want and try to make men take responsibility for their choices. That's what I see most women doing. And the thing about it is, with the middle class being punished and crushed as it's been, a lot of women are going to have fewer options, right? We already have what we call the 80-20 rule, and some people that watch my stuff probably already know what that is, and some may not. But the 80-20 rule is the idea that really 80% of the women are pursuing the top 20% of men in society. Whether you're looking at looks, mostly with resources, but whatever the top 20% of men are, women don't really want to be in a sexual relationship with the average guy. The vast majority of women, they want one of those so-called quality men. And then, like I say, they may settle later on if they decide, well, they'll blame men through this process, but they may decide, well, I have to settle now if I'm going to have kids because I'm 35. And now, I'm at a point where I have to kind of go for a Hail Mary. So I'm going to marry some guy that I don't really love and don't really respect and I'm not really attracted to. But, he's not part of the 20%, but he's the best that I can apparently do now. So I'm going to sort of try to cash in while I still can. A lot of these women are going to look around and men are broke. That's the point that I'm really getting to. A lot of men in the middle class, they can't afford to do that. And it's not necessarily a matter of men becoming more red-pilled or more men going MGTOW. I think that that's happening to an extent. And all of these things are related. Men are realizing, well, wait a second, my wife doesn't do anything that actually is positive for me. And now I've lost my job and I have to be around her all the time. And, the divorce rate's going up. All this stuff is related. but particularly with men not being able to afford to be the beta provider. A lot of men may not even wake up to the fact that they shouldn't want to be the beta provider, but they can't do it. They've lost their jobs, they've lost their savings. They basically are having to look after themselves because they know they know that a relationship's not going to work in their present state anyway. How many men are going to be in those circumstances now because of this really decimation of the middle class? I think that, a lot of women, my sort of take on it, my prediction, if you want to call it that, is that a lot of women are going to lose their shit. I think more women are going to... There's going to be a variety of different actions that they take depending on what the particular strategy of the woman is. But, ultimately, I think they're going to freak out. A lot of women are going to get very desperate because they're going to realize, wait a second, I can't just find some guy to take care of me now. And I don't want to take care of myself because, women are told that they don't really need to take accountability for their own choices. Men need to be accountable, but not women so much. And again, for people that disagree with that, I get it, but I'm not really going to go into justifying that. It's clear to me and a lot of other guys, I think, that watch my content, that women are not made to take financial responsibility for themselves the same way that men are. Women aren't forced to make, to even take responsibility for their reproductive choices, and yet men are. So, women have a situation where they've had it easy in the sense of being able to use this isn't a very sophisticated, this isn't a very sort of like polite way of saying it, but it's alpha fucks, beta bucks. Women have been using that strategy by and large for a long time now. And now, where are the beta bucks going to be with all this impact of the virus? And so I think it's going to be a shit show. I really do. I think this is one of the times, I guess, that men can sit back, men that see what's going on and already have sort of an understanding of where things are between men and women today in a general sense. I think we can sit back and sort of like, make our bowl of popcorn and look at what's happening and realize that, women are reacting to this because their plan has been foiled. Their plan has sort of been taken apart because there aren't that many men that they could just fall back on now. And, I'm not saying, of course, that every woman is this way, but most women, that's their plan. They ride the carousel, they find a beta, they have some kids, whether it's the beta's kids or not. And then, they make whatever life choices after that. But a lot of women are not going to be able to execute that plan now. And so I think that they're going to desperately try a different strategy. I think they're going to go in a variety of different ways. And it might be, like I say, amusing to see from the perspective of a guy that's already sort of mostly aware of what's going on between men and women today, to see what women try to do. I think you're going to see women that all of a sudden they're very anti-feminist. Whoa, feminism's bad. Feminism hates men. I love men. Look at me. Please marry me. Please. Because they're going to have a smaller pool of men that now have the resources to give them not even necessarily what they want, but what they'll settle for, right? Those beta bucks are not going to be there because they literally can't afford to have a family anymore, a lot of men. Not to mention the men that are figuring out what's going on with the family law courts and all that, with the wealth redistribution there. A lot of guys, even the blue-pilled men who would totally simp for a woman if they could, they're just not going to have the resources to do that in a lot of cases because of everything that's happening in our economy and our financial system. And so I think, like I say, some women we're anti-feminist now. You're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see a lot more of shaming A lot of women will take the opposite strategy, perhaps, and double down on feminism like they always do. Oh, the economy is bad because of men, and men need to give us more stuff. And where are all the good men? You're going to see a lot of that stuff too. But it's going to be amusing, I think, almost, because, or maybe it won't end up this way, but this is what I see coming. In my opinion, this could easily be what happens next. A lot of women are going to be desperate, and they're going to go in a variety of different directions, but they're going to have to sort of not start from scratch, but they're going to have to scrap the whole, well, let's just find a beta later on after, we've had our fun, and then we may have a couple of kids, and then we'll be taken care of. They're not going to be able to do that. So are they going to go, more to feminism and just hope that the government takes care of them, which could be the case? Or are they going to try to compete with the pool of men that are left that still have resources that they're willing to share because they don't know better? Or, that's what they choose to do? Like, these men that are part of the wealthy, the upper class that's left, they may be better off after the dust settles with the whole virus stuff and where we stand with our economy and our debt and all this. In some ways, they may still be well off, but then they're going to have so many women to pick from that they're not going to have much of an incentive to settle down. Or if they do, most women aren't going to be able to snag that type of guy. And the beta bucks, the guys that are sort of the lower tier below that, the middle class guys, they're broke. Because of everything that's going on. So, I'm trying not to repeat myself too much, but, where do you guys think this is going to go with women today? Are they going to double down on feminism more, or do you think you're going to see a sort of relatively large wave of women all of a sudden being anti-feminist, and we want a real man, and we want to help men again, we want to be a partner, trying to offer more so that they can compete with the men who are left that they actually want. The beta buck strategy is not going to be viable for a lot of these women, and I think they're going to lose it. I think they're going to lose their minds in some cases. I think they're going to marry themselves, and they're going to double down on being a strong, independent woman and have kids themselves and all that, and then they're going to be miserable as fuck, and they're going to blame men for it again. I think we're going to see a variety of responses, but I think it's going to be a lot more common where women don't know what to do, and they're forced to make a different strategy for themselves because the whole find a beta to bail you out because he has enough money to at least keep you temporarily satisfied, that's going out the window to some extent. A lot of guys are not going to be able to afford that shit, even if that's what they wanted to start off with, and even if they never get red pilled, so to speak. Where's this money going to come from, right? And so some of these women may, like I say, become more rabid feminists and just say, well, the government needs to help me because, the patriarchy has cost me my job or something like that. You might see that, or you might see it go completely the other way with, oh, I'm a conservative woman now. I'll cook for you. I'll clean for you. I'll love you and give you as much sex as you want and all this. Will we see a lot? I think we'll see all of it to some extent. But, the only other thing I want to say to that is we also need to be careful because for the guys that are strictly MGTOW, of course, you're not going to date probably anyway. You're going to avoid these women for the most part. So you can kind of sit back and be amused. But especially for the guys that still are considering relationships and dating and all that, it's going to become more toxic. Like, you're going to probably see things like common law marriage be reenacted, re-legislated, if that's a word, in a lot of states. Most states in the U.S. don't have common law marriage right now. But if men aren't marrying women because they know, well, I just can't afford to do this and actually have a family, or, the men that are left know that they have control now because they have their pick and don't want to get married, you might see something like that where, oh, you lived with a woman for a few weeks. Now she's, common law married to you and you have to take care of her. I wonder if that could happen too. So, and then, some women at an individual level will continue to be deceitful. They will trick men into getting them pregnant and stuff like that. So they have to try to give those resources to them. Like, you're going to see some nasty, underhanded stuff we've already seen. But, if women get more desperate, they're going to be more desperate to hurt men in some cases. Unfortunately, women are not told, or they're not taught by society, if you even can, that you shouldn't do those kinds of things. Most women see men as a resource or as a tool, more than they see men as an end or as a human being in their own right. And so I think a lot of it, man, is just, a lot of it could potentially be dangerous if you put yourself in a dangerous position with women. The trust factor is already gone for the red pill men to a large extent, but I would say the trust factor needs to be close to zero at this point, because women now have an incentive, because of desperation, to do things they may not have done before. And it may be amusing to sit and watch these women all of a sudden, oh, we're anti-feminist, or oh, the patriarchy took our job, or whatever it ends up being. It might be kind of funny, but you also have to make sure that you're not involved. Even for the guys that are still dating or whatnot, or being in short-term relationships, make sure your woman, if you're dating or if you're in a relationship, make sure the girl that you're with is not in desperation mode, that she's not one of these women that will not take responsibility for herself ever. Because as she gets more desperate, a lot of these women may try to, attach whatever responsibility they can on any man that they can find to help them, right? And things could get more dangerous in that regard too. So even though it might be kind of funny to see in some ways, desperate women have some power too, and it's better to avoid that power and getting caught up with them as well. Victocrates says, what happened to the strong independent woman during the epidemic? Yeah, a lot of it's gone away. The sort of victim ideology part of feminism has remained. You still see a lot of that. More of that, really. Oh, women are abused and oppressed and all this. But yet, like I say, you may see more of that. You may see more of, men need to help us. Please help us. Please help us. That kind of thing would be funny to see. But again, basically because they're getting a taste of their own medicine. Basically because they kind of asked for this, and then they supported what the government has done to middle-class men, to the beta bucks type of men. Not that middle-class men, not that those things are the same. You have middle-class men that are red-pilled too. But a lot of the men that these women wanted to rely on are now destitute to some degree, to varying degrees, because of the policies that women supported through big government. And it's kind of coming around to bite them potentially to some extent. And I think we might see some crazy reactions as a result of this kind of thing. Pedrito Navaja, I don't know I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that well, says, I'm Australian, but I lived in Colombia during the Venezuelan hyperinflation. Well, yeah, that's pretty crazy stuff, but at least you were in Colombia and not Venezuela, I would say. That's a good thing. He also says, women who one day had been professional women found themselves in very difficult positions. Settling was the least of their problems when the money ran out. Very sad situation. Yeah, I mean, what kind of reaction, if you don't mind my asking, did a lot of the women have in terms of how they perceived men in general, especially at the relationship level? Like, was there all of a sudden a movement to say, oh, we're sorry, we want to be anti-feminist now. We want to be all about being the traditional woman and helping you and all that. Please give us money and give us a place to stay. I think you're going to see a lot of that. And the red pill men are going to look at this and be like, I'm not glad if women suffer. I'm really not, other than they're getting a taste of kind of what they've asked for, their own medicine. But it's going to be amusing because men are the ones that are going to actually have to deal with trying to rebuild their own lives, and yet women are going to look at this. Some women will look at this and be like, oh, you need to help us. And a lot of guys are being like, they're going to look at this like, fuck you. We're not helping you. We can't help ourselves. If you want to help us, get the government to, stop doing what it's doing so that we can go back to work, or so that we can try to start over without all these restrictions. I think I'm at a point where I swear too much in my videos, but Mctocrates also says, or Mctocracy does say, Mctocrates, I'm sorry, I'm losing it. That's insane that men have to take responsibility for women's mistakes. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of just where it stands, though. And it looks like a couple of people sent messages but retracted the messages, which is... I think one of them said something about women going lesbian. You may see a lot more of that too, but that's not going to resolve some of their problems. I mean, if they take the path of we're angry at men and men are bad and men, are useless because they can't take care of us now, that could easily happen. You may be right about that, because it's going to be more difficult for women to actually tie down one particular man, right? Unless they can trick the guy into getting them pregnant or something like that. Even the regular guys out there, or the guys that are basically regular guys but have more wealth and resources, the men that are left that actually could, provide for a woman and all that, why should they do that, even if they'd be willing to do that, when you can have several women? When the choice, you have your pick now. The women are having to compete for those guys. And so I think some women are, like I say, are going to go into desperation mode. What do you guys think about that aspect? Do you think that women are going to be more desperate, or do you think that the government will just take care of them anyway, or, mostly it's going to fall on men to fix the problems that we have with our... the problems aren't going to be fixed, let's just be real about that, but to actually, rebuild their own lives. Do you think women will still have it easy, or do you think they're going to have to go into desperation mode now that the beta bucks option is not really available to them in such great quantities? Pedrito Navaja also says, Colombia was like night and day compared to Australia. Being with women was not difficult, and the influx of Venezuela women probably just created more competition. Exactly. Like, it almost boils down to a supply and demand thing. And really, gynocentrism is a result of supply and demand as well, you could argue. TFM put out some videos long ago. I don't really watch his channel anymore on BitChute, but I used to watch his content back between like 2015 and 2017 a lot. And, he talked about how basically gynocentrism is a result of men not being able to compete with the alphas so much, and you're trying to kind of use within the societal framework, men who want to try to compete with women, basically, if they don't have a huge amount of resources, all they can really do is try to be nice to women and all that, and try to, do favors for women. And so men try to use that to compete for women, but it backfires on them, and they don't learn that women don't really respect that anyway. So part of it's a lack of education, really, about how reality between men and women works. But part of it's also the competition aspect, the supply and demand. When there is no male scarcity and women get to choose, that leads to a lot of gynocentrism. But when you have these situations, like to some extent, what we have as a result of our economy being where it is in the wake of the virus stuff, women are going to have to compete with whatever few wealthy men remain, or for those guys. And, a lot of men, even the men that want to have families and stuff, it's just not going to be a viable option, even from a blue-pilled perspective. So, I don't know how much we'll recover from this in terms of the unemployment rate and the economy, but, this, like I say, my main point with the beginning of this video was that the whole goal was not to allow it to recover anyway. The part of the goal of these policies, a big part of it, was wealth redistribution. But that's going to create a scenario where a lot of guys can't play that beta bucks role. And so now what are a lot of these women going to do if that's what they want? Metocracy says the government is their daddy. Yeah. But the government's, it's just printing money at this point. So even our government is kind of desperate to keep this up. Like, on one hand, I feel like they did this to try to increase the power of the government. But on the other hand, eventually we're going to have inflation and stuff. Like, there's going to be consequences for everyone except for those that have the most resources, because they're going to concentrate more wealth in their hands. But that's just my opinion on it. Pedrito Navaja says, feminism is part of Latin America, but not to the same extent as the USA and Australia. Right. That makes sense. He also says, I think desperation mode is coming, but women will cling to their ideology to the bitter end. God mode levels of attention due to social media will be hard to give up on. Yeah, there's that misperception of how desirable and how valuable that they are through social media. And, a lot of them are just, they believe they can have it all because that's what they've been taught by feminism and other forms of just female-centric thinking. Like, mainly feminism in terms of you can have it all, but yet they still want the traditional man. They still want the benefits of traditionalism as well. So, how many of these women, like I said, they're going to have to choose a different strategy. That's where I think the real sort of interesting part comes in. They're going to have to choose a lot of these women that are not really strong and independent. The women that really can't afford to just do things independently, or they don't want to. Some women, have the finances to endure this, and their strategy may not change that much unless they want kids and unless they want a marriage. But for most of the women out there that have that beta buck strategy, they're going to have to change up. They're going to have to be forced to do something different, I think, in many cases. And if they double down on feminism, they're going to go nuts too, because, they're going to basically have to demand that the government take care of them. If they double down on feminism, that means they're kind of giving up on the find a guy to settle down with strategy. And if that's the case, they're going to have to be totally all about the victim mentality. Like, these women in particular, well, even the sort of the neo-traditional women that may come out of this are going to be dangerous as well. But these ultra-feminist women that may result from this situation, the women that double down, they're going to be really dangerous, because they're going to go all out to get whatever resources they can, probably from men and from the state, or from any source they can get it from. And so false accusations and stuff like that to try to take men down so that they can try to get their wealth, that could be more common. They're going to have to go all in on the victim mentality. And if that happens, these women they'll be funny to watch from a distance, because they're going to make themselves obvious in terms of their lack of character and everything in terms of, I'm a victim, men are terrible, men are evil, make men do what we want them to do. Like, it might be funny from a distance, but don't get involved with these kinds of women. Even if you date and stuff like that, don't be with a feminist to begin with. But if these sort of ultra feminist women result from what we have going on with our economy and everything, because the beta buck strategy can't work for them anymore, they're going to lose it. They're going to, blame men for everything probably, but they're going to have to find resources too. And they have no qualms about accusing men of anything because they feel it's justified based on their feminist ideology, their feminist doctrine to begin with. So that could be a dangerous situation if you get involved as a man. I would say watch from a distance. And the same with if we have these neo-traditional women that come out, watch from a distance. Because as long as the family law courts are the way they are, as long as marriage is what it is, as long as the domestic violence laws are the way they are, all the sexual misconduct laws, I think it's still clear to me that and this is a different topic and I don't want to go into that too much here, but going your own way is clearly the best option unless you absolutely have to have children and you can't afford surrogacy, or you don't want to do surrogacy for whatever reason, or you literally you can't rise above the idea of living for a woman. You can't find anything else to live for because you're at such a level that you've never been taught to live for anyone else, and so you end up in a marriage or in a relationship anyway. And that goes back to the whole is MGTOW for every man type of thing. I don't really want to get into that right now, but these women may come out and say that they're these neo-traditionalists and they hate feminism and all that. Men need to want to be with them because they'll offer a man this and that. They'll try to raise their sort of percepted value so that maybe they can snag one of the men that still has some wealth and resources for them. That be careful of that as well, because these women will still divorce you. They'll still take your kids away. Their goal is not to really necessarily find one man to be with just because they come out as neo-traditional. They still have all the laws and the whole culture behind what they want to do. And I think we have to remember that. There's nothing that makes women be accountable for themselves other than what you do as the individual man and the choices that you make for the women around you, if you're dealing with women around you. And that's not going to change just because of this. Even if women come out and say they're traditional again and they hate feminism, so what? The laws are still what they are, and that doesn't change the situation. It just means that they're more desperate to try to make themselves out as conservative women that hate feminism so that they can still find a guy. That's what a lot of it is. McTocrates says, Pedro, yes, they are naturally narcissistic, so they will never take responsibility and will definitely cling to their ways until they die. That's somewhat true, I think, but I think that it's especially toward men. Women have a tendency, I think, to factor in other women's feelings at times, but especially toward men. Most women see men as a tool. Most women do not see men as being really fully human the way that they are. I feel comfortable saying most women are like that. I think that to some extent, if we had a society that taught women that they actually have to be responsible for the things they do, that it would be different in terms of their personal life choices. They'd still see men as tools, but they'd realize that whatever decision they made in regard to that, they actually they're going to be forced to take responsibility for it. So for example, if a woman gets pregnant and she's not married, Or maybe she doesn't even know who the guy who got her pregnant was. Like, she doesn't know which man. She knows in a society that would make her take responsibility that, well, if you do that, you're going to have to take care of that kid, right? Whereas our society says, nah, just make the man, whatever guy you want, take care of it, basically. Say it's his kid. Find a guy that's willing to accept the idea that it's his kid. Be a strong, empowered single mom and make the government get involved to help you as well, to financially assist you. Because that's the society that we have, women don't develop an ability in most cases, to take accountability for themselves. The only women that do are the ones that are raised to basically do that. Like, they're forced to, as children, learn to take responsibility for themselves. But most girls, most women are never forced to do that anymore. From the time that they're kids, on, everything's men's fault. Everything's, blame men, blame the patriarchy, men aren't good enough. You hear this with songs, with entertainment and music, but I'm thinking of music in particular. You have all kinds of freaking songs about this man's a Peter Pan, and this guy, wasn't a good enough man, and I deserve better. Like, half the music out there has that sort of feminist, man-hating sort of aspect, and it really dehumanizes men. And like you say, Migtocrates, women don't really see men as human anyway. They are narcissistic, or like a narcissist, in the sense that they see men as tools. That's a biological thing. I think that's just a female nature thing. But a lot of it also is socially reinforced. And it's just a matter of almost common sense. If you have a group of people that never has to take accountability and can always blame another group of people for their problems, they're not going to take accountability. So that's a huge part of it as well. If you can just blame men, then everything will just be men's fault in the minds of your average women out there. But that doesn't change the understanding, or the the possibility, at least, that, well, you can blame men all you want. If men can't afford to take care of you, they're not going to take care of you. If a man can't afford to get married because he's lost his job and lost his savings and knows that he can't provide, it doesn't matter how blue-pilled he is. He's still not going to be able to do that. So if that's not going to, placate you or give you what you're looking for at a minimal level as a woman, then, uh-oh, what are we going to do now? We can't use the beta buck strategy. We're getting tired of the carousel, or we're starting to lose our ability to stay on the carousel. I think most people know what I'm talking about there. They're not just going to go out and get dick. If they can't do that anymore, and then find a beta to take care of her, to provide for her at some level, then you have to compete with whatever men are left. And if you can't do that effectively, because those men have their pick now, they're the ones that actually have more of the power now, you're going to have to take a desperate act. You're going to have a desperate switch or change in strategy. And we might see more women do that. Like I say, you can sit there with your bowl of popcorn, but make sure that she's not coming after you. Because women using that power that they have in society to accuse men of things that they didn't do and make men pay child support for kids that they don't get to see in some cases, that power is going to be applied in a way that is more threatening if they're more desperate to use that power. This may sound kind of silly, but I think it's absolutely valid when you think about it. John the Other mentioned on a video that he made that stood out to me. I don't know if you guys know who John the Other is. He doesn't make that much content, but he's a former MRA and has basically embraced MGTOW in recent years. He's in Canada somewhere. I think he's near Vancouver. But, he mentioned that the main thing in areas where gynocentrism is bad enough, where women can just basically do whatever they want and blame men for it. And they don't have to take accountability for themselves. And they can accuse men, and we're just supposed to listen and believe to most of anything that they say. Why, what really stops women or a particular woman from finding a man alone on the streets, on a side street or wherever, and saying, you need to give me all your money or I will go to the police and say that you did these bad things to me, that you assaulted me, that you tried to, snuggle with me, that you did all these bad things sexually or otherwise to me. Probably sexually, because, if someone gets beat up, there's going to have to be evidence of it. If you don't give me your money, I will go to the police and accuse you of these things. And what John the Other said that stood out to me is the main thing, really the only thing in some cases that stops women from doing this is inconvenience, right? They have to go through the whole process of putting somebody on trial and going to court and, hoping that you'll just give her the money, basically, and then potentially getting caught. If there's evidence for the guy, he may still be able to nail that woman with a false accusation and a false police report and all that. But even then, what are the consequences? But, the main thing that stops women from doing that is inconvenience, because they have other ways to get money. They have other ways to get by. But if those other ways disappear, that kind of thing could become more of a threat. Like, it sounds ridiculous, but if women don't have other options, and that's why I've mentioned that story, is, if women are indeed going to be more desperate because they don't have that beta bucks option to a large extent, because of the economy, because of the coronavirus nonsense, and everything else, the inflation that's going to result from that and everything else, it could be more likely that women will do this kind of crap. Because, the ones that have absolutely no morals whatsoever and see men as utilities, which is a lot of women out there, unfortunately, they could easily just, I'm going to accuse you of something, and if you don't give me your money. If there's no witnesses and stuff like that, it's just like a mugging, except instead of using physical force as a threat, it's the female-centric society and culture that is being put, used as a weapon against you. You could argue about how viable that is. I don't know that it happens much at this point, but I could see desperate women trying something like that if they think that they don't have another easy means of getting resources now. So, I mean, that's kind of... it sounds kind of silly, but I think it could be a real problem if we continue on one hand to have the problems that we are going to have with our economy and with, the middle class being so decimated. And then on the other hand, women having so much power over men in society and not caring about how that affects men. There could be some of those kinds of results. Men need to watch out. If women do get that desperate, I think guys need to make sure that they don't get desperate involving yourself as a guy in that situation. You don't want to be the guy that she tries to get desperate with, I'm not saying, of course, that, avoiding all forms of relationships is the right answer for every guy. I think it's up to whatever guy to decide that, at an individual level. But make sure that you're not with one of these women that's truly desperate, because she could come up with anything against you at this point if things continue the way they are. If they develop the way that I see them developing, they could get desperate and they could try to do these really underhanded things that could be very damaging to men. So I wanted to kind of end this stream with one last topic for those of you who are still watching. And that is the elites, the oligarchs, the people that I believe, in my opinion, have set forth a lot of these corona policies and have made a lot of the policy decisions that they've made basically to increase their own wealth and power over society, both through corporations and through the government, and basically just use the coronavirus as the newest excuse, a more potent excuse, to infringe on people's rights, crunch the middle class, increase the size and scope of government, and shut down a lot of small businesses, right? And increase the amount of power and wealth that they have for themselves. Is there a plan? And this is a question that's kind of open-ended, and it's very controversial. It's definitely not a politically correct question to ask. Is there a plan after they create their totalitarian government? Because you have a lot of people that will say, well, this is all about creating a one world state. Okay, maybe that's the case. But if so, what's their plan? Because after they concentrate all the wealth and power to themselves and they completely wipe out any sort of constitutional rights that people have, assuming that they're successful with that, and they basically use Marxism as their doctrine to achieve that. Oh, we're helping these oppressed people. You don't deserve free speech because you're not oppressed. You're an oppressor. You don't deserve to have the right to bear arms because, you're of a particular color or creed. If they're successful at doing that, how long does society have? I don't think that that's going to be sustainable. I think that this whole idea of a dystopia, it might be that way for a while, but it's probably going to collapse. Because eventually you run out of people's money to take. Eventually you run out of an ability to blame other people and to use that as an excuse. Well, due process doesn't need to be a thing because women are victims, and if they accuse a man of something, you're just supposed to believe it. Eventually, when you take the high-value men and high-value people out of society, and you demoralize everybody that is propping society up, I don't think society continues beyond a certain point. I think you're going to have a total collapse or a civil war of some variety eventually, if it's taken to its logical or I guess most likely conclusion. So I kind of doubt that there's a plan other than the oligarchs like power, and the oligarchs want more power and wealth. But eventually, you've seen this with every other Marxist society. Eventually that society collapses, whether you're looking at the Soviet Union, Cuba. I mean, you could argue that some of these societies have continued, but really eventually that sort of system collapses, right? Whether you're looking at socialism, communism, Venezuela. I'm not sure what the economic situation is in Vietnam, but they probably don't really have a strictly Marxist system anymore. I'm not too familiar with that. But, China's doing better, but it's also really just a totalitarian state. But at the same time, eventually when you have this whole, we're going to blame this one group of people on everything, and, well, not just one group, but several groups really, eventually you run out of victims, right? Eventually you run out of people that can be used to prop up your government. Eventually you just end up with people that want the government to take care of them rather than people that are actually being productive and keeping society afloat. So I don't think that the elites really have a plan, personally. A lot of people may disagree with this if they watch this video at some point. I don't think there is a master plan. I think they just, hey, let's get more control over society. Let's use this crisis to increase our wealth and power. But at the same time, what eventually happens? You look at the amount of debt that our government has. That's another example. This will never be sustainable. I don't see how all these trillions of dollars in debt, and then we're going into so much more debt, I don't see how it doesn't eventually result in a collapse. And once that collapse happens, how do the elites actually stay in power? Maybe they have a way of doing that, but I'm not really seeing that. I think it's just power hungry behavior. I think it's just short sighted, to be honest. I'm not saying that there's never a strategy or there's never any sort of planning or thinking about how to orchestrate these events. Like, I believe, for example, that social engineering has gone on in our society. Feminism is kind of a simple example. The reason why feminism at a political, legal level has been embraced is because our leaders knew that, well, we can just use women to vote for bigger government because they don't realize that, this is going to impact everyone in a negative way if you pass a certain policy, that the only people it helps is the people that already have power. These women will just vote based on emotions, and they generally want that provider and protector, so they'll vote for big government. Let's do that. Let's give women the right to vote. I mean, from a political perspective, that's why it happened, right? You can analyze that from the perspective of the feminists themselves, the women that wanted these rights. You can look at it from a male versus female nature thing. But from a political perspective, this was all about just, well, we can use this to get big government. But at the same time, that's not really a plan. Like, you engineer things so that strong men become demoralized, right? You label them as the oppressor group. Well, these strong white men that are, a representation of those who founded Western civilization, they're the ones that will defend Western civilization. So let's demonize them. I think that goes on. I think that that's definitely a thing. But I'm not convinced that they have an end other than they all want power. They all want more wealth and resources for themselves. But in wanting that and in sort of creating policies that are designed to accomplish that, they create a society that is not on a sustainable path. And so this whole idea of, well, the elites plan this and that, and it's like, maybe they do, but I'm skeptical as to whether it's even going to work out for them. I think that they're just so blinded by putting more of the wealth of society into their hands that eventually they're going to create their own demise, at least to some extent. You can argue about how they survive a collapse, but I don't see how that's going to be beneficial if they no longer have control over that wealth that they have through the economy. If that can be seized, or, the value of the dollar goes down to the point where, we have hyperinflation. I think if that collapses society, whether it's financially or economically or whatever, I think that they lose too in a lot of ways. So maybe I'm wrong about that. If somebody like Vincent that has more knowledge about, the overall system with finances and banking and stuff, who has more red pill knowledge about me when it comes to that stuff, or anybody that does, I don't see how this is a sustainable, viable plan. I think it's just give us more money, give us more power, and we'll hold on to this power for as long as we can, and we'll make people, subjugated under the government, under our influence for as long as we can, and then if it collapses, well, we'll just do it again. I think that I don't know that they have a plan for the conclusion. I think that they just hope to hold on to power and to gain as much power as they can for as long as they can, using whatever means necessary, and then hold on to it for as long as they can hold on to it. That's what I see going on. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. That's kind of an out there idea that I've just been thinking about more. It's like, all these $1 trillion packages that have been passed by the United States Congress. How is that going to lead to anything that can allow the elites to hold power in the long run? Because society is not going to exist in the long run. Like, it's not sustainable, in my opinion. I think the plan is just to use Marxism to, like I say, gain all the resources basically in society. But then what happens with Marxism. just, every socialist and communist country has basically seen its economy and system collapse. So I don't, like I say, a lot of people think that the goal is some form of one state throughout the whole world, one world government. But even then, it's like there's one entity that's going to have power through all that too. So, like, it may not be in the interest of all the elites to even cooperate with that to begin with. And then I don't think that that's viable on the path that they're going down. I think that they hate people. They hate the common people. They want to treat them like cattle as much as they possibly can. And their goal is to use the government and corporations to crunch everybody else eventually. But then how is there going to be any motivation left to, have that sort of 1984-like scenario? It's like, I don't know that would last for long until people just said, screw off, we're just going to be sort of reliant on ourselves again, or, maybe some people are still reliant on the government, but there's no level of respect. I don't know how it would work, but like I say, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it's sustainable for them somehow, but I don't really see the bigger plan in a way that's actually something that could be carried out after a certain point is passed with all this Marxist bullshit. Pedrito Navaja says, Autocrates. Yes, I have seen that characteristic in some of the women I have gotten to know. I'm very careful of understanding the character of women I'm with. I'm not ready to give up the game. I can understand that, yeah. I think that's a respectable position. Some MGTOW guys, the monks, won't agree with that, which I understand too, but right, that's the main thing that I'm saying with how women may react to the whole situation at hand is, or, to the fallout of all this is they may get more desperate and they may go 100% with their chameleon mode. They may just completely do anything they have to do to compete with whatever men still have, for whatever men have resources still. They may also, like I say, just go full feminist to the point of reaching a new extreme, saying, men need to pay for this, men need to do that. And it's just like, well, unless they can get the government to do that for them and to punish men and make men just pay for random women's bills and make men basically take care of women again somehow, that may not be a very good strategy. So a lot of these women, they may go full feminist more than they already have. They may double down on feminism and become absolutely just very overt with their man-hating more than they've ever done, which, again, that might be funny to see because more men would then figure out that that's where things stand and maybe get red-pilled. But you also might see the whole, oh, I'm traditional. I love my man. I'm only been with, one guy or whatever. Or I've never, I'm a virgin, and they're not, but they'll say that. Like, you may get some ridiculous claims that women make to try to compete with whatever men they think are still viable options. Pedrito also says, but I'm extremely careful and keep the power in my court. Yeah, some places you can do that still, and in some places it's become nearly impossible. But in South America, that might still be possible. McTocraty says, I'm in monk mode since my divorce. Yep. I can totally understand that. Pedrito also says the anti-white rhetoric in the media is a complete disgrace. I think a lot of people see through it. However, it is already reaching dangerous levels. Yeah, they want that. They want divide and conquer based on race, gender, distract the people as much as you can and get them to go after each other so that essentially the oligarchs can just continue to concentrate power and wealth in their own hands. And the virus is the same way. With Corona, it's just like, get the people who refuse to go along with the nonsense and pit them with all the people that believe what they're hearing in the media and from the government, and have them go at it so that they can't see that the policy doesn't do what it's supposed to do in the first place. Whether you're looking at the masks or the stay-at-home orders, it's like they haven't done anything to stop coronavirus, have they, after a year? So what is the end result? Well, the end result is these are bad policies, whether you think the coronavirus is a big deal or not. But the media and our leaders don't want people to think that way. They want people to continue to be at each other's throats. And that's not connected directly with race, and but in the sense of divide and conquer, it's basically a similar idea. Pedrito also says, eventually these Marxist ideas will create the very enemy created in their imaginations. Yeah, I mean, that's what I think, basically. Like, either society will just collapse, or the people may rise up against it before it gets to that point. But, in some form, right? Whether it's massive unrest or whatever it is, that's what a lot of these bribes right now are for. From the federal government is giving people all these checks. This has gone through 3 times now, I think. This is the biggest one, $1,400, because it knows that unless it does this, people are going to realize, hey, we ain't got no job. Our finances are dwindling. We're struggling to get by, and the government's not actually doing anything for us. So fuck off with this coronavirus stuff. Help these small businesses. And so the government's like, oh, we need to head this off. We need to make sure that people don't get too mad and start causing us more problems. And so let's give them this bribe money, basically, so that they can be, pacified, at least for a while. It's sad that a lot of people don't see the big picture of this, though. And, I'm not saying everybody has to agree with my complete take on this. There can be differences of opinion, but to just look at it and think that we're being told the real reason for all these policies, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Well, guys, I probably made this stream a little bit later than I should have. I appreciate Migtocrates and Pedrito for the good conversations. A lot of people may watch this later, of course. But I wanted to get that out there where, so many people, it seems like, are getting caught up in the whole pick a side with the coronavirus. You're ignorant if you don't think that masks and staying at home and all this is positive. You're selfish. You're a bad person if you don't wear a mask when you go out. Versus, I'm not going to wear a mask because I think, my rights are being infringed on, which they are. But really, it doesn't matter. Like, the policy itself it simply doesn't work. Otherwise, after a year, we would not be in the same place as we were in 2020, right? As we were shortly after all of this started. If these policies were effective, why wouldn't we see 1/10 of the incidence of coronavirus that we see now? And even if you want to put a different fraction onto that, 1/2, the numbers aren't down 50%. The numbers are barely going down now. And like I say, when the numbers do go down, it's going to be because people are getting the vaccine or getting the virus itself and becoming resistant against it. And so it's not going to spread as much. But the masks have done jack crap as far as actually helping to, lessen the severity. Even if you're totally on board with what you hear about the severity of the virus, what have these policies done? We're in basically the same place, other than hospitals have more resources, there's more toilet paper in the stores, people have had more time to adjust, and we have vaccines, different vaccines now, that are being administered that are just, over the last month or two becoming prevalent or available in high numbers. But other than that, what the heck? What good have these policies done? Regardless of where you start off in your position about the coronavirus. And so, as I mentioned, to kind of wrap up the video, to discuss the main topic, the main points that I was trying to make, when you look at what you're being told and you realize, wait a second, these policies are simply not doing what they're supposed to do, theoretically, based on what we've been told. Well, if that's the case, that can't be the reason. Otherwise, we'd be trying to change the policies. Unless you could argue we have stupid leaders, incompetent leaders. That's possible too, of course. You could make that argument. But assuming there's an actual reason for these policies, they're not doing what they're intended to do or what we're being told they're supposed to do. So I think it's important to be able to take a step back and say, okay, what makes logical sense then? What have these policies successfully done that they could actually be intended to accomplish, right? What the goal, what we're being told doesn't make sense. So what actually does make sense in terms of the real effects of these policies? Well, the real effect is the middle class has been decimated. People are more dependent on the government to print money so that they don't go broke. Small businesses, along with all that, have been shut down. From the beginning, corporations were allowed to keep their businesses open in many cases where small businesses had to shut down. Gee, that's ironic, isn't it? It's not. I mean, it makes sense. There's a reason behind that, right? And all of these things have occurred because of these policies. And you could question, how much damage would have been done to the economy without the government getting involved. You could say some of this may have happened to an extent anyway, but the government clearly exacerbated the problem with these policies. But my contention would be that that was the whole purpose of these policies from the time that they passed, or at least shortly thereafter. Because you have to be able to say, or look at it and say, well, the masks have not done anything. Requiring people to socially distance everywhere and wear a mask and stay at home more. We're not in a better place as far as having the virus under control than we were in March of 2020, other than having the vaccines and having a few more resources for the hospitals and stuff, and toilet paper. What else have we accomplished? Well, we've accomplished a great deal when you look at what the policy has actually done, the actual true effects of these corona or supposedly anti-coronavirus policies. The only logical conclusion I can reach is that the actual intent was to do what it's done, to the middle class, to working class people, to small businesses, to people that weren't dependent on the government before, but are now getting all this bribe money to basically, keep themselves somewhat financially afloat. The goal is to make people more dependent on the state and to basically give more money, more of the balance of power and resources to corporations. That's the only thing these policies have accomplished, and there's no attempt to change it, to alter course. So I have to believe that was the intent of these policies, and that these policies have been quite effective for the goals that were actually in place, which is not what we've been told, of course, because you're not going to tell people, hey, we're going to shut down your business. We're going to make you dependent on the state. You're not going to tell people that. But they knew, I think a lot of our leaders knew, that that would be the result of these policies primarily, that it would be traumatic to the economy and to people's finances. People's finances would be greatly put in jeopardy. And so, especially since there's no, hey, this didn't work, so let's quietly shift the policies as much as we can, and then tell people, hey, you don't need to do this mask thing anymore because things are better. Even if they were going to use propaganda, you would think that they'd use propaganda to make it look like what they were doing was effective against the coronavirus, but they're doing the opposite. They're saying, oh, it's just not enough. We need to continue to do this for another however many months. Why? It doesn't work. We would have seen positive results by now in terms of greatly reducing the number of cases of coronavirus, even in theory. Like, even in terms of, if you believe everything you're being told, it doesn't make sense that the goal of the policy is to combat the coronavirus. The goal of the policy has been achieved. The goal from the beginning was to hurt the middle class, to redistribute wealth to the oligarchs, to those that have the most of the wealth to begin with in society, and to make people more dependent on the state. That's all this accomplished, and I have to believe that was the real goal of all these policies. Agree or disagree, feel free to leave comments after this stream is posted. I really am going to get into making standalone, or whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call them, pre-recorded videos. For the most part, I think, I'm going to work on those, not because of not having too many people watch this stream, but because I think that's kind of what I do better a lot of the time. So I don't know when I'll do another live stream, but I've got a few scripts for videos that I'm working on. Some of them are going to be more scripted than others, but I also have a video that I'm going to put on BitChute that I made quite a while back and never posted, but I think I'm going to edit that and put that up too. But it's been good talking to McTocrates and Pedrito. If I'm not pronouncing that right, I'm sorry. But thank you guys for watching. Thanks to anybody that watches this afterwards. And like I say, I'm going to make some more pre-recorded videos about a few different things and some MGTOW topics. Some of them are more political, but a lot of it is sort of just based on some of the stuff that's gone on in the community, the men's community, and just sort of ideas about MGTOW that I've had more recently. So I'll see some of you guys on those videos as well. Thanks for the people, like I say, that tuned into the stream, and I'll talk to you guys some other time.